So I don't remember why exactly, but at the beginning of the year in January, or maybe it was December 2024, either December, January, doesn't matter. I decided that I would start syncing up my breathwork offerings with the moon cycle. So doing it on the full and new moon. Before that, and even back when I lived in Los Angeles and was doing them live, I would always do it on Sundays, just because it felt like a good way to start the week. But this year, I think there was something in me that wanted to bring that practice into greater alignment with natural cycles. And the clearest natural cycle, the most visible one for most of us, is the waxing and waning of the moon. And I was also conscious as I did that of a couple things. One, a few years ago, I had a Jyotish reading, which is a Vedic astrology reading. There was a lot in there that really resonated. One of the things that the guy said was that because of the way my chart is astrologically, I have a very deep connection with the moon cycle, and that I might want to do some sort of a practice to acknowledge that. For a couple of years I was fasting on the new and full moon, but I would lose track, and it didn't feel, it felt like it was just for me. And I find that when I do practices that are just for me, they don't tend to stick. So part of the intention behind aligning the breath work with the full and new moon was to do it both as an act of ritual for myself, to bring myself into alignment with those cycles, but also to do it as an act of service for others, for anybody who might want to come to the practices. So when I started, I had no, I actually had kind of been allergic to astrology, and I hadn't felt any particular draw to it. And there was a part of me that, and looking back at the posts I've made and the way that I would talk about it early on in like January, February, there was a part of me that was apologizing for that. Like, hey, look, I'm not an astrologer. I don't even really know anything, but here's some stuff that I thought might be interesting for this moon cycle. And as time went on and I got greater confidence and realized that, oh, not only was this bringing me into alignment with the full and the new moon, it was also a learning opportunity. I also learn best in public, like when I'm figuring stuff out kind of on the fly. It's harder for me to really internalize knowledge if I'm just on my own with a book or a study session. I learn through teaching. So I learned a lot this year. I learned a lot about how the waxing and waning of the moon, when you bring it together with whatever sign the moon is in, tends to generate a pattern of energy that brings us from internal grounding, deep embodiment, a really settled place of being at home in our bodies, outwards and outwards towards ideation and spiritual expansiveness, and then back in. The moon cycle, each individual moon cycle is like a breath, with the inhale being the filling and the exhale being the emptying. And then if you look at the whole story of the year, there's this beautiful interweaving of inner and outer, of dream and spiritual and numinous with concrete action. And you're constantly being invited to dance between the two, to use the concrete to inform the numinous and the numinous to inform the concrete, which I thought was so beautiful. And at the beginning of the year, I only focused on the moon because it's the only thing I could really see. I didn't have interest in like the moon squared with Capricorn or Venus or whatever. And then as the year went on, I got really, really curious about the greater network of relationships in the sky. And you can see it if you look at the way I wrote about it. At first, it was just this moon invites us to do this. And as the year went on, especially the last couple months, it's been bringing in some of the other planetary influences, right? Other parts of that astrological ecosystem. So the other thing that became very clear to me over the course of the year was very much how much those relationships affect the flavor and the way that the moon cycle lands in our bodies, on the tides, on the planet, right? I'll be exploring that a lot more next year. And there's a distinction between the lunar cycle, which is what I started with, and then lunation, which is kind of a snapshot of the moon at the apex or nadir of its cycle, and the whole picture of the sky at that moment, right? What is the network of relationships creating influences if we take a snapshot at the full moon and the new moon. And so each year, even though the overall cycle and sequence of signs is the same, it's going to have a different flavor and different influences depending on what's going on with other planets at any given moment. And I'm finding myself, despite my, resistance to astrology, really, really excited to explore that. So, yay, look forward to that next year. The other thing that this kind of spurs for me is how similar it is to any kind of examination of a system, where generally it starts with an inquiry around one thing, right? Myself. Who am I within my family system? If I'm working on social change, maybe I'll start on water, right? Providing drinking water. Well, that doesn't exist in isolation. So we start with that question, we look at it, and suddenly we're looking at politics, we're looking at economics, we're looking at climate change. Everything is part of a system. And at a certain point, what could be really interesting is no matter what system we're looking at, we also bring in the moon, we bring in the planets, right? We bring in the seasons and the earth, really to get a sense of what that larger ecosystem is. And there's nothing new about this idea. This is really common in almost any indigenous culture that I know of, but I'm thinking specifically of the Kogi people who really, they are so steeped in connection with the earth and connection with kind of like acupuncture points all over the world, from the Amazon radiating outwards, that their existence, the way that they breathe and move, is so tied to those large, huge systems that our brains can't really hold. And one of the things that ritual helps us do, one of the things that being so specific in our practices help us do, is kind of not mentally hold the system, but really embody it through our behavior, through the way that we breathe, through the way that we relate. So there's this huge difference. And I'm starting to really see and feel this in the worlds of like coaching, leadership development, team development, where there are all of these intellectual systems around it. There are these intellectual constructs. But if we lean too much into those constructs, we lose the felt sense of the system, right? Feeling the echo and reflection of a system in our own body means that instead of just externalizing it or intellectualizing or plotting things on a graph or a map, right? If we really develop the discernment and have the desire to do so, we can find the reflection of echo of any system in our own body. And we can then have more agency. We can work with it in our body. We can get information about the system by working internally at a granular level, a really specific level in our own body. Or we can work at the vast stretches of the system. We can work on any element of the system. And again, attunement and discernment begin to feel that influencing our body. So there's a dance there. And I think one of the things that happens, at least as far as I can tell, as I move more into it in like leadership development or systems change, is that we consider ourselves separate from a system. But as soon as we observe a system, whether it's our own body, the universe, a community, whatever it is, as soon as we observe a system, we become part of that system. It's the same with a story, right? A system is just a story that's unfolding in real time. So if I become an observer of a system, the quality of my observation shifts the story of the system. It becomes a participant, maybe not a huge like primary actor in it, but it does have an influence. And the system, because I'm now in relationship to it through observation, begins to work on me, right? So I change through my relationship with the system. And the more intellectual we make it, the more we lean on frameworks, the less space that relationship has to work. Now, I'm not saying there's anything intrinsically wrong with, system change frameworks or, any of that. But I am saying that when we work in that way, we're not taking full advantage of the power of relationship, right? The power of the observer effect, which is something that's been documented everywhere from sociology to quantum physics. that the quality and presence of our observation is an act of change making, right? The quality and presence of our observation is change, both for the object of our observation and for ourselves. And when we are the object of our observation, right, the quality that we bring to that observation matters. I'll bring it back to the personal on this. I recently had gum surgery. It's like genetic gum disease. It's really annoying, really painful. And I've been in a place of observing it from a kind of fatalistic place, observing it from a place of, well, look, I'm just going to lose my teeth. This is a stopgap measure. And talking with Julia, one of the things that we've been talking about and she's been reminding me of is like, no, actually, the quality of your observation matters. So if you go into something fatalistically like that, you're actually kind of tipping the scales. You're putting your foot on the scales towards that potential outcome, as opposed to if you observe with a sense of optimism and healing and wholeness, which is kind of one of the core concepts of coaching or healing work, right? If you observe from a place of potential and growth and even miracle, it's not that that will definitely happen, but that quality of observation creates a bias, right? In the fabric of reality, in the unfolding story of, in this case, my teeth and whether I get to keep them. And that's been a really kind of concrete example that is reminding me on a daily basis that as easy as it is to say, well, hold hope, observe with wholeness in mind, observe with potentiality, sometimes, especially when it's quite personal, or when the world, as it does seem now, seems so wildly out of balance that there's only one direction it could go, it's actually quite challenging and quite sometimes confronting practice to hold wholeness and possibility, right, as our primary lens, not in a magical thinking way, not in a way that completely discards or overlooks the fact that, I've got significant gum disease and we have fascists in power in the United States, but in a way where that just becomes the lens, right, that helps us navigate these situations. To bring it back to the moon, one of the things that coming into greater sync with these natural cycles, like honoring and recognizing the waxing and waning of the moon, has done is actually made it easier to stay present with overwhelm. Because as overwhelming, as accelerated as things may seem, whether it's the breaking down of systems in my own body or the breaking down of external systems, every 2 weeks, the moon is full. Every 2 weeks, the moon is empty, is new. So no matter what is happening, no matter how long or short those 2 weeks feel over the past year, it's been such an incredible gift to just land for 45 minutes or an hour, to spend another hour or two like researching, learning about the moon, learning about that, the sign, and then increasing the lunation of it, that larger relationship, before going back into the world. So those natural cycles are trustworthy, right? They can be a place of sanctuary. They can be a place of solace when everything else in the world and maybe in our bodies starts to feel chaotic. The moon is still there, a constant heartbeat, a constant drumbeat, just reminding us that we can always come home to these reliable, natural rhythms. I think that may be it for this one, my friends. I'm just really sitting with the constancy of natural rhythms and natural cycles. And if you haven't, and you would like to join a new moon or full moon breath work, just reach out to me. I can either send you a recording or send you a link to a live session. As always, thank you for listening, and we'll be back once more before the end of the year.